In the series, The Past is Present, New Montagnard Artists. My name is Andrew Young, today's host. Our presentation today is a special addition to the Past is Present, New Montagnard Artists series. Our presenter is Besty Renfrew. She is a studio artist and educator in her own right, but in her talk today, an appreciation of Montagnard backstrap weaving, artistry, history, technique, she'll be taking her own artist's eye and knowledge and applying it to these beautiful pieces which represent an important part of Montagnard tradition. Before we begin, a few essential acknowledgments. I'll go through these very fast. This project is made possible by funding provided by Creative Greensboro, the Office of Arts and Culture of the City of Greensboro, through a Catalyzing Creativity grant. A shout out to Montagnard Dega Association and its branch, youth branch, the Montagnard American Organization, for applying for the grant. Please check out the chat section for links to the Past is Present Facebook page and this busy week of interviews, presentations, and celebrations. And I'll refresh that chat page that chat site in just a sec for those who can't see it. This evening's program structure will consist of the featured artist presentation. At about 6:15 or so, we'll break for questions. If you'd like to use the chat feature to ask questions or to make comments, please do. We will also invite your live questions on camera at that time as well. Jelly Long is doing tonight's camera work, and now it's with great pleasure that I turn things over to this evening's presenter, Besty Renfrew.
Hello everyone, I'm Besty Renfrew, and I'm going to give you an overview of Montagnard weaving. I'm going to start with a short overview of the history of backstrap weaving in Southeast Asia, and then I'm going to bring 10 pieces, one by one, and discuss some of the more interesting attributes, whether technical or interesting motifs, for each of them. The last 15 minutes of our program, I'd like to open it up to questions, conversations about today's presentation and the pieces. Okay, all right. We'll talk about the origins now. All right, backstrap weaving in Southeast Asia probably began with Proto-Thai speaking people around 3,000 years ago in what is today southern China. These people migrated throughout Southeast Asia, bringing their backstrap loom technology with them. These traditions are still practiced in Thailand, Laos, and Vietnam, including the Central Highlands, which is where the Montagnard are from, and the Cham, a closely related people of southern Vietnam. The indigenous people of Vietnam's Central Highlands include two major linguistic groups, the Hmong Khmer and the Malayo-Polynesian. The ancestors of the Hmong Khmer speaking peoples migrated south from the Yangtze River in what's today modern China into Thailand, Laos, and Burma, as well as the Mekong River areas. In Vietnam, some of their descendants are the Banon, Steng, Sedang, Kho, Banhar, and they are some of the earliest people to settle in the Central Highlands. Malayo-Polynesian speakers come from Borneo and migrated to Sumatra and Vietnam by around 600 before the Common Era, later than the Hmong Khmer people's arrival in Vietnam. Their descendants are the Cham, Jarai, and Rade. During this time, the Dong Song culture flourished in Vietnam and other places in Southeast Asia, several centuries before the Common Era and several centuries after the Common Era. The Dong Song people produced many trade goods that have been found throughout Southeast Asia, including bronze drums. The decorative motifs seen on some of these bronzes strongly relate to the designs found in Montagnard weaving. The Malayo-Polynesians may not have known weaving when they arrived in Vietnam, but soon they had contact with the Thai-speaking people associated with the people of the Dong Song culture. The design motifs of spirals, rhombs, twined linear elements may also be derived from such things as plaited bamboo and rattan fibers for baskets and mats. Even though the Hmong Khmer and the Malayo-Polynesian people came to Vietnam's Central Highlands in separate waves of migration, Many of their cultural traits have influenced each other. The Highland tribes have shared, borrowed, and altered patterns and techniques of backstrap weaving amongst one another for generations, yet each tribe has distinctive variations and tastes for specific features. All right, so I'm going to start showing you these pieces. Begin with this first piece as a way of kind of orienting us to the type of weaving backstrap weaving is. You'll notice that this is a giant circle, okay, which is one of the features of a continuous warp. It's not been cut yet. This is exactly how it looks when it comes off the loom, and all of the loom parts have been taken away. This is a piece that was woven by Junie, and she is Rade or Ide. And what's characteristic of a lot of Ide fabrics are a black background and a very, very large or more prominent design that runs through the middle. And these are some of the things that we'll see throughout these textiles, is that some of these particular patterns are called supplemental warp patterning, and they tend to have a kind of quality where they look like they're floating above the surface. Okay, it's a fairly difficult technique to do on other types of looms and so forth. This is something that Junie is known for quite well. There are other types of designs in here as well, which are an alternating warp, an alternating float warp pattern. So they're slightly different, but they're what's called supplemental, and they are part of the warp design. And the warp, just to kind of remind us of what a warp and a weft is, a warp runs along here in this direction, and the weft is going to be going in the opposite direction, would be the width. Okay. All right, this next piece here was also woven by Junie. This piece has been finished. It has fringes that have been tidied up so they won't unravel. But the characteristics here that I'd like to point out are designs that are called a supplementary weft. So on this particular piece, the weft is running this way. The warp is running this way. This is the design that I want to focus on. This is called a discontinuous supplementary weft, supplementary weft. And I can actually see where the fiber begins and coils through and ends up in just that particular motif. There are other supplementary weft pieces in here as well. They run continuous across the surface. So we have two different types. What's quite interesting about these weft techniques here are that you don't see them on the other side. They seem to ride on the front. They don't go through to the back there. So this is a supplementary weft addition here. I find this a little unusual, these dotted lines. We don't see this too much in Jurei weaving, but in this piece, she's brought that out. These particular designs that we see here running on the white part are the designs that in some instances come from the Dongsung culture, others very, very ancient designs, some of them geometric, and some of them picking up motifs and ideas from nature. Okay. Second piece, 3. This is a piece that's also woven by Junie, and this is a skirt. What I want to focus on with this particular skirt here is, in addition to some of the designs that we've already just seen, I want to focus on the joining of the panels. And these skirts are usually two panels that are joined together. So in the middle of this skirt, and even for blankets, is a kind of join that you see right here. It's extremely strong, and what she's done is she's brought it out to be a decorative element. Okay, it's a cross loop knit type of join, and here it's done very exquisitely, and she's got many different colors that bring these together. It's very, very tough. It's hard to break it apart, not like the seams that we have in our modern clothing. Threads and wrapping them around the warp. Okay. So Junie and her skirt patterns. The next piece I'm going to show is another skirt, but it is a skirt that is now from, I'm going to look at something that is dry. And I'm just going to put this in half here because it sits on their little table here a little bit better. Dry textiles, especially women's clothing, like the Ide, will also have a lot of black or dark blue background. And for the Jadai, there's often a red panel with lots of decorative motifs inside here. This is another example of the supplementary warp technique here, the patterning. And these are extremely fine threads. This is woven by Nike Rallon, and she loves these very, very tiny, thin threads. And so she's also added a little bit of the gold foil in there. You might be able to see a little bit of a glitter. And one of the really unique things about Nike Rallon as a weaver is she is an expert with the ketech. She does her own. Sometimes women in a family will split up the different sorts of parts of warping and weaving and finishing them up. She does her own. And these are exquisite. Once somebody asked her, what if we make a mistake? She says, make no mistakes. So she's very, very good at the ketech. Also notice the fringes you see on the bottom. Many Montagnard clothes have these fringes. They're either braided or twisted at the end, sometimes with some starch, just to keep it from unraveling. Her joinery is a little bit more simple, but she's got a kind of zigzag stitch on here. They are quite strong though. These will not fall apart. Okay. I'm going to switch to a bonhomme skirt here. I'm going to try to lay the whole thing out. This is done with acrylic, so it has a slightly different feel to it. Many of the traditional ones would have been done in cotton, but one of the things about acrylic yarn is you can get very, very bright color, and some of the techniques that are being used here, you need a thicker thread. So you probably notice right away that there's not as much black on these. Many of the bonhomme skirts have a lot of busy patterning, and it almost looks like it's kind of a patchwork quilt. It's not. These are all part of the same fabric right here. I believe that the central panel here is the alternating warp float. I'm not entirely sure on that because it's so wide. I'll show the back side here just so that any of you that might be able to work this out, but it's very, very tight. It doesn't quite float like some of the others with Junie, but this is something that I find really exquisitely done. And the pattern here is something that comes from or is related to the Dongsung culture, with these patterns being on these bronze implements that I talked about before. Very, very old. I find them very difficult motifs to really bring up into things. And you'll notice down here, this is a totally different kind of scheme here. It's all part of this panel. You'll see figuration in bonhomme textiles. Little people sometimes will be in these. And these appear to be embroidered, but they're not. They're supplementary. and you don't see them on the back side here. So they are supplementary, and they're just kind of pieced in here a little bit at a time, and you can see where they're hiding. When they're not coming to the surface, they're just below that. And so that's a beautiful technique that is combined with this this green and this red. Let's see, yeah. Okay. And then the join here.
Slow down for the camera, Betsy.
Okay. The join on this particular fabric is not as obvious. Okay, so it's very, very not visible. Okay. And maybe a few more elements here of the weft, supplementary weft right here. This next piece is a bit of a mystery. It's a baby carrier. It's extremely long. It probably was used. Some of the fabrics that you have seen so far look rather new, brand new, not washed. This has been used, but we're not really sure exactly which tribal group wove this. We think it's probably from Pleiku. Some of the folks that I've talked to, either Pleiku, Montagnard, Rade, possibly dry. It's got a kind of dry sense of large black background, and then the red here. But the yellow stripes running through this supplementary warp pattern, I don't have replicated in any of my other fabrics. I have seen it in Montagnard fabrics. Look at the back side. And these float techniques are such that you can usually, the threads will cross over many, many lines, many wefts. This is a lozenge, or excuse me, it's a rhomb, and it's a rhomb. I would call it a diamond, but sometimes it's called a rhomb design. I consider this piece to probably be one of the hardest ones to warp. I can't imagine warping this, so. I'm going to show the next two pieces together because I believe that they probably were woven by the same weaver, certainly the same group. And I believe this to be Cahoe. And let's see here, I'm just going to quarter it up. They are skirts. They are well worn. And one of the features that I'd really like to focus on in this piece is the inclusion of an ikat stripe. This is running along this is the warp. Okay, so the warp would be along the longer element here. And when you look at ikat, it goes from light to dark. And when you stand back, it has a kind of speckled effect. This is something that was probably learned by the Cham, or learned from the Cham, who learned it from the Thai-speaking groups of people. Not that many Montagnard groups use ikat. It's very, very simple. And they've included in, again, the warp. But it's a little bit on the rare side. You don't see it too much. We see it in the skirt right here. And we also see it in the skirt right next to it. This is the ikat. An ikat, by the way, is like tie-dye. It's basically where you tie a resist around a fiber, you dip it in dye, take it out, take the resist off, and so you have areas that didn't accept the dye. And this is something that's a highly sophisticated technique that also is being used in Indonesia, Indonesian textiles. Okay, the next piece I have is a rather large blanket. This blanket could use a bit of cleaning, and it's okay that we can see the weaver's name. That actually gives her credit. I should mention that there was a very kind soul named Sister Gretchen, and Sister Gretchen was a Catholic nun who early on assisted Montagnard refugees when they first came to Greensboro, driving them to doctor's appointments and things like that. She has since passed away, but over the years, many of the people who she helped gave her or paid her back with many of these blankets. She gave them to me in the hopes that I would educate people or show people all of these beautiful weaving traditions. This one is woven by Anna Bui, who I believe is Pierre Cabrou's wife. I believe that Pierre Cabrou is Srey. I don't know what tribe his wife is from, but this has a kind of Kaho look to it because many Kaho fabrics are white. This is undyed. It's a very natural cotton right here. And in addition to the striping that we see here, the brown and the kind of black, the alternating float pattern right here, we also have in the central panel where there's the blue and the red, fairly thick yarn. This is the supplementary weft. Okay, so the weft here, I hope I'm going the right way, yeah. Weft here would be going back and forth like this. Notice the join. This one's a little bit different than what we saw from the Rade. And down at the bottom, and I've mentioned why these finishing techniques are used at the very end of the warp. You can tell this is the direction of the warp with the fringes here. This does look like a kete. I'm not sure if it's the same thing as kete, but it looks like it's been wrapped or twined. It is continuous with the weaving. It's not been something that's been simply sewn on there. It is part of this, whether it was taken off the loom or not. I'm not absolutely certain on that. But this is a way of keeping the whole fabric from unraveling. Otherwise, you would have, a lot of threads coming out. And then these are either twisted or braided or something like that. So you'll often see kind of a little bit coming off here like this, and that just indicates that it's a different technique than what was used in the main warp right here. Okay. Do we have time for one more? Got one here. But this last piece here, I do know is Cahoe. It was given to me by a Cahoe woman. And it is one panel. 2 panels would make a skirt. And you'll notice here that we've got the blue background, which we might see quite often in Montagnard weaving. This, of course, is not dyed with indigo on cotton, which would have been traditional. This is probably modern acrylic thread here. I can feel it. But it's very beautifully crafted. I see no errors in this at all. It's repeating the same pattern throughout. So it doesn't quite have the same sort of busyness that you might see in a Benong. It doesn't have the little figures that you see in Radé. Slightly different finishing down at the bottom here. There might be some embroidery stitched in here. I'm not quite sure exactly how this is finished, a little bit different. But again, these sort of finishing techniques used here are to keep the fabric from unraveling. It's very simply done, but very, very good edges too. Those of you that are weavers appreciate good edges. I've always had a hard time getting good edges on fabrics when I'm weaving. But again, this is Cahoe, and probably would be one panel for a skirt. Or it could be used for making men's clothing, vests and things like that.
So we're at 6 o'clock right now, and so we're actually ended up a little bit early in terms of your presentation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run to my computer and go ahead and put the question to you, okay? We have one question. And let's see, the question is from Zoe Van Buren, and she's asking, for pieces that are woven here in the United States, has moving to the U.S. affected the choices that weavers make in style, design, and motif? Similarly, have there been any changes in the traditions or style preferences of wearing these woven garments?
Okay, I might start off with the techniques and the motifs. One of the things that I've noticed is that, well, that last one of the earlier pieces I showed you, this probably was woven in Vietnam. I can't be absolutely certain, but it doesn't have the commercial kind of quality to it. So there's a feel and a look that's a little bit different. I think the women adjust to it. They choose things that they like. They are choosing the more brightly colored things that probably wouldn't have existed 100 years ago, 75 years ago, but it's the weaver's choices. Bright colors are probably pretty exciting for people. So the choices of working with acrylic and synthetics, there's a lot of synthetics in here. It doesn't take away from the beauty of the designs. As far as being able to weave the complicated designs that some of them may know, it's possible. I do know that some of the women prefer a certain kind of thickness of crochet thread. If it's not available, then they'll go to something that's a synthetic and may not get quite the same result. Synthetics are more slippery. They don't have that kind of, cotton is really beautiful because it kind of stays, I don't know, it has a kind of quality to it that doesn't slide or slip, unlike nylon. So that's, and the second question, what was the second question?
So the second part that we have is, the question was, well, just to refresh your memory here, we talked about the choices that weavers make in style, design, and motif, and then the second part being, similarly, have there been any changes in the traditions or style preferences of wearing these woven garments?
Yes, there have, and I've actually brought in pieces that are essentially panels. The pieces I did not bring, I should have, there was a beautiful vest, a man's vest that was in the collection. I didn't bring it. And it's been tailored. So once women learn how to use sewing machines and understand darts and things like that, those have been incorporated. These are not. These are pretty much rectangles. So some of the older or more traditional amongst them will use the older styles. I think one of these had a dart in it. I'm not going to dig too deeply, but the darts would be ways of sort of accommodating the skirt to make it look a little more feminine, to make women look like they have a waist instead of it just being kind of a large kind of fabric. So that might be it. Now, the younger women definitely love the material, but they will make some of the most fantastic tailored outfits that fit their figures and are not kind of a generic one-size-fits-all. That's what I found.
So here's a comment from Melina Kassar. She's saying, as a multi-tribal indigenous Montagnard, that is Benung, Darai, and Benar, I grew up seeing all of these types of textiles. Super proud of Montagnard women who take love and time into their art.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you, Melina. I really appreciate you saying that. And please, if you know any women that still are doing these things in Vietnam, I mean, really check in on them and find how they're doing and if there's a market for it. One of the difficulties in America is that Montagnard women traditionally have made these for specific purposes. You give a baby carrier to somebody who's just had a baby and are less keen on going out there and hawking their sales. So, that's what makes it harder for this tradition to live in this country is finding a market and having a demand for it. But yeah, thank you, Melina.
So I'm waiting to see if there are other questions here, and we'll stall for time. And while I'm asking you a question, Betsy, maybe some more questions will come in. Oh,
sure.
Okay, I see a question coming in, but I'm going to stick mine in first. Way back, you went to Washington, D.C., to the Textile Museum, and you brought some of these pieces to an expert, and maybe you could tell that story about what Madabel Gettinger's response was.
Yeah, Madabel Gettinger goes way back, and her husband, I think, knew Gerald Hickey, and Gerald Hickey was the renowned chronicler of Montagnard people. I took this particular piece here. She wasn't really sure. She said she's really interested in it. She'd like to hear me later on find out if I could find out anything about it. But she couldn't quite pinpoint it. She did steer me in the right direction. At first, I thought it was something totally different. I won't even tell you what I thought it was. But she did kind of steer me in the right direction. And she did say, when I said, well, I'm learning backstrap weaving, she said, oh, you are brave. So she's an expert on Thai textiles. And so she's written several books on that. She's less knowledgeable on specifics. Michael Howard, I think, is the expert there, but she did give me her time, and it was a really good insight. She basically said, embed yourself in the community, learn all you can, learn the words for the techniques, and how each of the different tribes does something different. With Thai textiles, she says there's always a tradition for giving things. When is that occasion? I don't really get a sense that there are ceremonial aspects. I could be wrong. Other than when there's a birth of a baby, give the mother a baby carrier. When someone dies, they like to have a blanket over the coffin. There may be other times that I'm unaware of. So I was not really that knowledgeable about ceremonial occasions when they're given as gifts. That might be more of a Buddhist thing. But she was fairly helpful, but not real keen on saying, well, or she did say, well, people study the more exquisite textiles, the Thai, Indonesian, and I really had to defend Montagnard weaving in that this is not something someone could replicate that easily. And I did ask Naikwalan later, I said, can you weave this? She said, no, it's too hard. And she's an expert weaver. So I think one of the things is that as women die that have knowledge of certain techniques, that particular style is gone, that motif is gone, it's probably not going to come back. Some people can probably reverse engineer this, but she did give me the encouragement to go on and find out, learn the words. understand the traditions for weaving these. And I have learned how to weave. I'm nowhere near as good as what you see right here. In fact, I cannot warp a design. I can only warp some stripes under the tutelage of some good Rade women.
We've got, now we have a bunch of questions coming in, which is great. Zoe Van Buren asks a follow-up question, I think. Well, do you know how many active weavers are in North Carolina or even the U.S.?
I don't know how many there are. I've tried to meet as many as I can. And Greensboro, of course, is the area with the largest concentration of Montagnard women. There probably are some in Raleigh. What I've found, though, is that if I don't know the women personally through teaching them English, they're extremely shy. I do know of one woman that sadly passed away recently. There's a picture of her floating out there somewhere. And another weaver, Junie, has unfortunately retired from weaving because she has had a series of strokes. Nike Roland is 80 and has difficulty getting around. She's probably still sharp as a tack and you know, with her thinking and so forth. The COVID epidemic has kind of slowed things down. But I would say that there are very few women that weave on a regular basis that are over the age or under the age of 50. They're mostly elderly. If they've been here for many, many years, they may not have good eyesight anymore. They may not have good health. So there are fewer and fewer of them. I don't know the exact number, but not that many.
All righty, we've got a question from Jihong Chen, and she asks, do the patterns have symbolic meanings? I noticed there are a lot of lines and repeated shapes.
Yeah, that's a great question. One of the things that I think is probably coming out, I'm going to show, I think, one of the Benong, because the Benong has a lot more things going on in a small space here. And as far as the meaning, it's not necessarily a particular meaning. The figures aren't particular people. It's not an army. It's not no one particular. I think they're just sort of ways of decorating. I do know that the tradition of the supplementary warp technique is something that is a very old and very conservative technique, I guess because it's so difficult to do. And many of those designs come from those Dong Song culture drums. This is thousands of years ago. So some of those are just very ancient designs. Why diamonds predominate? One of the things I found is that if you look at weaving, you'll find a lot of diamond patterns in weaving of baskets. Just simply the way that you have an under, over, under, over. You sometimes come up with squares, often come up with triangles, diamonds. And this particular one is called they actually call them a rhomboid figure. I just call it a diamond, a rhomboid with the spirals coming off of it. That is something I see throughout Southeast Asia. I have seen so many variations on what they might mean. It could be a seed. It's the way a bean looks when it's coming up out of the ground. These little spirals right here could be the fern unfolding. So there are vegetative qualities about it. When I've asked the women, what do these mean? What do you call it? They sometimes say, I don't know. I just weave it. But other women say that many of the designs come from things that people see around them. And I'll pull out Junie's because she does have some of these really interesting little motifs that some of them are from the animal world and so forth. And it's not so much that this little lizard has any particular kind of meaning. I do see that motif a lot. I think they're just simply things that people see around them. Corn. I'm not sure if that's just something growing in a pot. And then here we have that rhomb with the spiral again. I see that again and again. You also see it in the kateh. That is a very powerful symbol. I don't know what it means though. I don't think it really has the kind of meaning it may have had. So I wish I knew that, it definitively means X, Y, and Z, but many of them are just ancient traditions. Some of them are variations that the women come up with, and some of them are just things from nature.
Okay, we are having some sound problems, and I'm talking now just to see if Leanna's gonna give me a thumbs up to say that my sound sounds good. Leanna, we sound all right?
It's okay. It's just fading out a little bit, but we can hear.
Jelly, you have to
We can
put
hear
your
you
if you can mute your
out a little
mic.
bit, but may I make my comment while I'm on?
You got a question?
Were you able to hear me?
Yes, if you could go ahead and repeat that.
Okay, now I can hear you clearly. Earlier the sound was okay. It just fading out a little bit, and it kind of got worse. But I would like to make a comment that I really appreciate Besty, teaching English to all of the elder women in our community and taking the time to appreciate the artwork, the weaving artwork, and taking the time to learn these work herself. Besty and I sat in a weaving class for a couple months, and it is extremely difficult for a beginner myself. I remember growing up, sitting in the longhouse, watching my mom did her weaving, and it took, because she only did it when she had time, so it took her like weeks and months. So we treasure these items. So you don't really find the hand weaving or backstrap weaving a lot nowadays since the machine comes along. So
Yes.
we treasure these items. So when you don't have money, when you get married, that you can use that for a dowry as an item to give to the guy's family.
That's right. Yes.
We keep these at home, so we still treasure them. We don't let it go, and it's hard to buy them now. It's extremely expensive. The backstrap weaving, the authentic one. I just wanted to make that comment. Thank you, Besty, for taking the time to teach us and taking the time to learn from the women that you worked with in the past.
Well, thank you for that appreciation. I've loved working with them. So hopefully I can learn from Helen in a future time. She was the last teacher I had, and she was very good with warping. Any other questions?
So Leanna, do you want to take control here and see if we can get some more questions from the audience, or are there any other comments to be made?